Hi, this is Michael Warren with Arclight Reviews. Today we're discussing Peter Jackson's Hobbit trilogy. Today the second installment of that trilogy, The Desolation of Smaug. If the original plan had gone forward to make The Hobbit into only two parts, then really this would have been the conclusion to The Hobbit as originally envisioned by Guillermo del Toro. But as luck would have it, through the story that we talked about, that was in the cards and Peter Jackson ended up directing the sequel. Ended up directing the prequel trilogy, although technically The Hobbit really isn't so much a prequel as much as the different books are just told out of order, so that what happens chronologically first in The Hobbit is later followed up by what's going to happen in The Lord of the Rings, but The Lord of the Rings was shot about 10 years earlier. We do have some commonalities between the two films, including we have Ian Holm reprise his role as Bilbo Baggins from The Lord of the Rings in The Hobbit. We have Frodo Baggins, again in the prologue of An Unexpected Journey, played by Elijah Wood. And we have Christopher Lee playing Saruman the White, Ian McKellen playing Gandalf the Grey, Cate Blanchett playing Galadriel, Hugo Weaving playing Elrond, and Orlando Bloom's character, Legolas, is also the last kind of important add-on. These different characters have lifespans much longer than that of a normal human. It's several decades after this. Those same characters are introduced in Lord of the Rings, but they actually have a very similar appearance. I think the whole concept works pretty well and is pulled off. Some technical details about The Hobbit. It was released on December 14th, 2013. The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug. The theatrical version of The Desolation of Smaug runs at 161 minutes, and the extended edition runs at 186 minutes, giving us an extra 25 minutes of additional scenes and footage, different moments put back into the film, and you can feel it. It's about twice as much as what we had restored back to An Unexpected Journey. I'm very happy to report that the extended edition of The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug, ended up improving the story greatly and making it a much better film overall. Something that I was hoping would be the case in all the Hobbit films. After seeing what a big difference it made in my enjoyment of The Unexpected Journey, The Desolation of Smaug I think is improved even better with the addition of these extended scenes. It gives us very key and important scenes important to the development of Thrain, the father of Thorin, and what his character was doing, and also the pedigree and the history behind the One Ring. The extra footage in the Mirkwood Forest of the dwarves being under the enchantment of the river magic was also a very good addition and helped really put you into the shoes of our dwarves and hobbit as they are having to travel on their own without Gandalf's assistance for quite a while. For much of this film, the majority of this film, they are Gandalf-less, which is never a good thing to have, is not have your wizard with you in your main party, as any D&D player would know. I'm also glad to say that the extra scenes with Thrain help expand on the Dol Guldur, Dark Lord Sauron's storyline later on in the film, as you start to understand more about the Necromancer and what's going on. And excuse me, I almost forgot something. As you may remember, I think I can trust you with the knowledge of this. I found this special magical ring back when I was filming for my retrospective on An Unexpected Journey. And, well, since you already know my little secret about my precious, I think it's okay for me to put it on so we can all see it. I mean, nobody would dare try to take my precious, right? So, the development of the Necromancer storyline is I think much better with the additions of the Thrain scenes. The scenes with regards to Thorin's father, who has gone mad. And we discover that he did have the Dwarven Ring that was mentioned in the extended editions very thoroughly by Gandalf as being something that Gandalf was trying to track down, because he had known of what was going on with all the other dwarven rings, but had lost track of what happened to Thrain's ring. And so when Gandalf finally encounters Thrain later on in the film, we discover that Azog the Defiler had chopped off his finger and stolen the ring from off of his hand, which would help also explain why Azog is now a dark servant of the Necromancer, who happens to just be a literal Dark Lord Sauron returned from the grave, at least in part. His power is not fully restored yet without the one ring. That is precious. But thankfully he hasn't got a hold of it. And I'm certainly not giving it up, so good luck to him on that one. But the Dark Lord Sauron is trying to regain his full powers by getting the One Ring. The sense of the pervading evil from the Necromancer as Sauron begins to reclaim his life force and begins to exert influence and control over his thralls. And Gandalf seems to finally be caught up with everything that's going on with him and is insanely trying to take him on by himself. I think it was probably a mistake, and he should have gotten some reinforcements before going in. And the fact that he tried to do this without Radagast the Brown was probably a bad idea. But honestly, I think they should have called in some reinforcements and waited for some other people to come to help him. I think Gandalf was hoping to take care of this problem with the Dark Lord's return at Dol Guldur and get back to the hobbits and dwarves as quickly as possible to help Thorin and the rest with their ongoing quest. However, him being imprisoned by Azog the Defiler has really thrown a hitch into this plan. Anyway, it's pretty exciting. I think that the extended scenes, again, are an even greater improvement of the overall character development and story in this particular film, in the Desolation of Smaug. I'm a huge fan of them, and I think this 4K version just looks incredible. It made a lot of different scenes from the film that I remember in the theater looked much better in this 4K edition, which is very strange, but it is. I'm happy to report it. It looked much better on my home video screen than it did, and so far everything has been looking fantastic on the entire setup. Another scene which I didn't really connect to very strongly in the theatrical cut was when the party encounters the Skin Changer, takes refuge at his cabin. And I remember thinking the first time I watched it in the theater, thinking, you know, I kind of wish they had just skipped over this scene in editing, not bothered with it. However, in this extended version of the film and in this screening, I felt like it was a good, welcome respite for the dwarves and helped expand on the world and the lore, the world building of Middle-earth. In fact, having this kind of nemesis of Azog the Defiler and him providing important intelligence to our characters, it really came across as a more vital scene now, this time through, and I'm glad for its inclusion in this extended cut and for being able to connect to the pathos of the Skin Changer and his sadness of having his family and his entire race having been murdered off by Azog and his orcs. And it was one of those things that stood out to me as something in this hangout film. You know, this is actually a good character. This is a good guy. The Skin Changer is an interesting fellow, and I'm glad that the scene was included into the Hobbit at all. A good way to provide some character development and backstory and really help to deepen the emotional bonds between the characters. Again, another great benefit of this extended cut is I think it lets the entire story breathe enough so that these different moments, you can actually appreciate them. Because a lot of these moments may have been in the theatrical cut, but having them more fully realized and having them nestled more comfortably in the story with more comfortable pacing and stuff, it's a huge benefit to the overall appreciation of what you're watching. And that's something that I think that people should remember and keep thinking of as they go forward in their screenings of the next movie. the Battle of the Five Armies also. On occasion, a little bit more than in An Unexpected Journey, I do remember a couple of slightly cringy moments passing by very quickly in the Desolation of Smaug, including just some awkward editing in a couple of moments, a couple of scenes. So there are a couple, like, I wouldn't say this is like a completely perfect film in every respect, but even those little tiny moments of cringe that just don't quite work, they don't quite smooth out perfectly, they are a very, very small part of the film, and they do not ruin my enjoyment of the film at all. And in fact, I was watching this with some family, and they commented again on the fact that because of their experience with the Unexpected Journey Extended Edition in 4K, again, they feel so much more invested into the story this time. And the fact that the extended cut has so much more storyline and characters and little moments that just make the whole film work. Like a lot of little moments in Laketown with the bard and his enemies in that town, and the dwarves going on different escapades and having different adventures, trying to be smuggled in and escape, and eventually having to evade different guards and doing different things. It works out a lot better, and it's strange to say, but I'm very happy to report that it does work much better, the extended cut. Having this time to spend with the characters and develop them better is hilarious. Even just the opening scene, which was an addition of a scene set in flashback form of Gandalf meeting with Thorin Oakenshield for the first time, was really a tremendous pleasure to watch, and was a great way to introduce the additional new Thrain storyline subplot that's in this extended cut, which does develop that entire dwarven royal family storyline much better, deepens it much more profoundly, and is much more interesting, and gives Gandalf more to do when he's in Dol Guldur, when he is trying to defeat the Necromancer and stop his forces and ends up getting captured. And that entire subplot, its removal of the theatrical cut, I think is a huge hit to the theatrical cut. It really made a lot of damage to the plot. And a lot of the cool character stuff that was going on, and especially the stuff about the ring. I like the fact that it showcases Gandalf's development of tracking down all the different rings of power. And it makes much more sense now when you get to the Lord of the Rings why Gandalf seems to recognize what the One Ring is when so many other people are completely clueless. And it makes a lot of sense that Gandalf has been believing that the Dark Lord Sauron's return was imminent, and that it's something that they should be prepared to deal with. And his tracking down the rings of power is part of him making those preparations. And in fact, in The Hobbit, something that was fairly implicit in the storyline becomes explicit in Peter Jackson's telling of the Hobbit trilogy, that really one of the great motivations Gandalf has for doing this entire lonely mountain quest with Thorin and his kin and his dwarven subjects is the fact that he wants to prevent Smaug from one day becoming an ally of the Dark Lord Sauron, who he believes is going to return. And we see in this film that he most definitely has returned, at least in some form. Maybe not in his complete, full, embodied form, but fans of the books will also note that this appearance of Sauron, as shown in The Hobbit, is much more closer to the way J.R.R. Tolkien originally wrote the appearance of Sauron in the books The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. His appearance here is much closer to what we get in the book form. And I think that was a great touch. It was a good change. And I think it was interesting that he kind of developed a way to kind of show why that change was made. And the fact that Sauron, you just kind of go deeper and deeper into the eye of Sauron to see him appear in this Necromancer form. And it works very well for the film. Most of the stuff with the dwarves, most of the humor works pretty well. I don't think every single moment worked quite as well as it did, I think, in An Unexpected Journey. I think in this film, there's a couple of moments that didn't quite connect quite perfectly, but they're very small moments and few and far between. And for the most part, everything is much better, including the journey through Mirkwood. I went to go see it with family in the movie theaters when it came out, and we had seen an unexpected journey the year before, and we were watching the Desolation of Smaug now. And the Desolation of Smaug was really intense. It was pretty fun in the theatrical cut. Again, without the extended version in the theatrical cut, some things hit a little bit more hollow. It rang more hollow. A couple of things didn't land quite very well. And here's the weird thing. In the movie theater, a lot of scenes looked very cartoonish. It looked very silly, including the barrel riding scene in the Elvish River when they get to the woodland elves. And that scene didn't really work in the movie theaters very well to my eye. But strangely, that entire scene looks much better and more realistic on 4K on home video. And the scene now with proper context and character development, and now that you're kind of on board for this hangout film and hanging out with these characters, that scene now, the barrel riding scene that was kind of so annoying to me to watch the original time, it was a little bit too, it was a lot of cringe. I felt a lot of cringe with different moments, and when our fat elf, Bomber, ends up, doing little things and doing some awesome little exploits, in the theatrical cut, it felt pretty silly and not realistic, and Legolas jumping around on their heads didn't feel quite grounded, or there was certain weight missing from some of the CGI special effects. And I'm not sure if they did anything to touch them up since then, or if just now on home video, they're with 4K, we're finally seeing it like the way maybe it was originally designed to look. But now that we can see it that way, it looks so much better. It's so much more realistic, and there is weight to their movements and actions, and it does not feel like Legolas is just flying over the elves. It doesn't feel like Bomber is just, going crazy, insane, beyond the realm of possibility. It feels a little bit more grounded. It is fun. It is engaging. I think a lot of kids will find the scene actually pretty enjoyable, and I found it much more enjoyable right now, to the point where the scene that originally kind of annoyed me in the movie theater the most, it's kind of like people's version of explaining what was wrong with The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug. A lot of people went to the barrel riding scene, and that scene works. I feel that scene works perfectly now in the context of this film. And in the context of this 4K presentation of the film and home video now, it looks great. It looks fantastic. I don't really understand how it could look so much better than it did in the theater, except perhaps maybe the technology that we're using to watch it is just more apt to showing the subtleties to it. Maybe the HDR transfer in the 4K UHD discs is somehow just properly formatted, oriented, and is matching the technology better. And maybe the projection technology we have now is better. The television and projection technology we have now, I think, has had a lot of improvements, and those improvements, they really come through so very well to make this film much more enjoyable and fun to watch in this viewing than I ever had before with the film in the theatrical cut. And something else I found very cool about The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug, is the fact that we care more about the humans in Laketown, because this is our first time really coming across many humans in The Hobbit since the whole story started. And I think the introduction of Bard and his family, the master of Laketown and his toady henchman, his toady assistant, and their guards, it is a much more interesting dynamic, and it is kind of fun them making it, showing an almost American-like revolutionary spirit to a lot of the people living in the town, to them wanting to establish democracy and not living under this autocrat, this wealthy master who sits there grinding them into the dirt, essentially, and taking everything for themselves. No taxation without representation is something I could imagine some of the townspeople shouting out. And I almost looked at Bard as a kind of John Adams character, where he's a little bit grumpy and disliked by a lot of people. And having just seen the John Adams miniseries starring Paul Giamatti a little while ago, I actually did feel that there was some grounding in that. I do think there's some similarities in those characters. And of course, John Adams wasn't quite as action-packed and heroic in battle, but I think his desires to help the American people match very closely to how Bard looks on his own people of Laketown, the city of Dale that had gone to Laketown basically for refuge after Smaug turned Dale into mostly a ruin. So that entire storyline with the humans, it's fleshed out more. There's more scenes of character development. There's more intrigue, and there's a little bit more going on also with the villains. We get to hear their point of view a little bit better and how they're trying to keep Bard under their thumb to prevent him from making this uprising that will uproot them from the place of power that they developed for themselves. So I'm pretty excited because I think the film works so much better, and a lot of the things that didn't work for me before work much better now. And even the moments that I don't really care for as much, very small little snippets of scenes here and there that don't really work for me, they're so easy to ignore in context of the entire momentum of the film now, and a much better momentum and stronger from beginning to end, that I have to say those 25 minutes of scenes, they do an even bigger difference here than those 13 minutes of extended scenes in The Unexpected Journey did. And I was very happy to see that happen. And I hope the same thing can be said for the third film, which I am about to watch after I finish this video. So I'm really looking forward to finishing this review and getting on to this third part and being able to complete our retrospective journey. But I do remember in the movie theater, when I was watching the theatrical cut, for the very first time, I remember feeling that some of that relationship and that romance between Tauriel, who is played by Evangeline Lilly, who is an invention of the screen by Peter Jackson and his co-writers, who are both women, by the way, which I thought was interesting that he co-wrote it with two different women. I think they made an interesting choice, and the romance between Keely, Ross Poldark from Poldark, and Kate from Lost, Tauriel, works much better, even though I don't think there's any scenes added back in of that particular relationship. However, the entire overall flow of the film works so much better, and we care by this point so much more for the characters, that relationship between Tauriel and Keely actually is pretty sweet and works. And something that it's weird because I wasn't like a huge fan of the dialogue the first time, but this time I didn't really mind, and it actually gave some flavor to the dwarf Keely, and his boldness and his affections for Tauriel, I think, were very refreshing, given how restrained her relationship with the other elves are. And her character really seems to gravitate more to that type of earthy, romantic, emotional feeling. And she's at odds with the other elves, particularly the Sindarin elves, which Legolas and his father, King Thranduil, are. And that whole dynamic of a kind of pseudo-love triangle between Legolas and Tauriel and Keely, it works much better in this viewing, and with the whole context of the extended cut, it doesn't stick out like a sore thumb like it did in the theatrical cut and in my first viewing back in the theater. And I have to say, this change helps a lot, because I've always liked the character of Legolas a lot from in the storyline later on. And so the fact that they actually give him something to do in this story that isn't written in the original books is pretty fun. And I think an interesting thing happened. So Peter Jackson, he did want to bring back Orlando Bloom as Legolas. However, he wanted his character to mostly just be the warrior, the same type of warrior that we saw from Lord of the Rings. And the fact that Legolas now has this kind of romantic entanglement where he's in love with Tauriel, but Tauriel is warned off of having a loving relationship with him by his father, the king, Thranduil. It was a little bit weird the first time I saw it in the theater, but it really lands and sticks in a way that I didn't expect this time. And this is something, by the way, that Peter Jackson and Evangeline Lilly, they weren't really big fans of this suggestion by the studio or by the financiers of the film. But when they decided to expand the Hobbit story more and turn it from 2 films into 3-film trilogy, they listened to their financiers who told them, we want to see that relationship between Kili and Tauriel made a little bit more complicated by the introduction of Legolas as a potential love interest for Tauriel and introduce a love triangle. And Peter Jackson and Evangeline Lilly, they weren't big fans of this suggestion and they weren't very happy with it, but I think they wound up pulling it off very well, and it ended up working much better this time in my viewing. And even though there's a couple of false moments, I think in the final film that'll be hard for them to work around with regards to this particular relationship and some of the dialogue that happens later on. If I remember correctly, that scene, I'm not sure how they're going to be able to fix that, but maybe the context of it will just make it so much more improved. But I actually felt that Orlando Bloom, by having this unrequited love with Tauriel, was a worthy addition to the story. It was not completely random. It didn't come out of left field entirely. I like the fact that we see that Legolas is not just this automaton elf killing machine, but he does have a heart. I do like them having mention of Thranduil discussing Legolas's mother, who I'm not entirely familiar with the backstory on that, but it sounds like she may be dead at this point in the story. And there does seem to be maybe a little bit of friction between King Thranduil and his son Legolas, and he seems to not be overly fond of his son's romantic attachments. He seems to have intentions of Legolas marrying some type of royal elf of a higher bloodline and authority. I don't know if this is ever in the cards, but I kind of like to imagine in my head that Thranduil is kind of imagining Elrond's daughter, played by Liv Tyler in the Lord of the Rings films, Arwen. He's kind of intending Legolas for her. And he kind of wants them to get together and help strengthen their elven royalty and their royal connections and bind Rivendell with the woodland elves more closely together. I do love having Ross Paul Dark and Kate from Lost having this developing relationship, and I think one of the reasons why their romance works as well as it does is because of how interesting both of those actors are on their own. And whether or not, Peter Jackson's heart was fully into it, I think he did this subplot justice, and at least in Desolation of Smaug, and I think that relationship between them is interesting and beautiful so far. So anyway, it is a surprise to me. I ended up actually liking a little bit of the love triangle. I think they didn't overplay it. I don't think it became Pearl Harbor levels of distracting from the overall storyline. It was fairly subtle. And Orlando Bloom, it gave him a little bit more emotional meat to deal with in these Hobbit films. And I'm glad they included it so far. I think we'll see what happens in the last film and how they conclude that storyline if it remains as strong. If the extended cut in that film might help to improve it, and maybe just the overall general satisfaction I'm feeling with the overall improved emotional connection to the dwarves, the Bilbo, Gandalf, Galadriel, all their storylines. I think a lot of that stuff that plays out finally in the Battle of the Five Armies will pay off correctly as well. That's my hope. And finally, I want to say the introduction of Lee Pace, actor Lee Pace, in the role of Thranduil, Legolas's father, who is the king and ruler over the woodland elves in this region, is an excellent addition to the cast, and he was a perfect casting choice for this part. And I've been a huge fan of Lee Pace's ever since he played the Pie Maker back in Pushing Daisies. I think he's a great talent, and his work in films like *Halt and Catch Fire* and in *Guardians of the Galaxy* as Ronan the Accuser is something special. I think he brings something very interesting to his roles, and I like it when his kind of villainous characters have all these shades of heroic goodness interlaced in there, which I think Lee Pace pulls off very well. I actually ended up watching the premiere to Apple TV's adaptation of the Foundation novels, which were written by Isaac Asimov. And in a respect, the Asimov Foundation novels are as important to science fiction as Tolkien's Lord of the Rings trilogy is to fantasy. But Lee Pace is also in the Foundation, playing the Emperor of the Human Empire, the Empire of all humans, the Galactic Empire of all humans. And he does a fantastic job as the Emperor, or who they refer to as Empire when they speak of him. And he's a remarkable actor. He keeps pulling off really interesting things with roles that might be more black and white with other performers, but Lee Pace is often able to bring in a kind of nuanced gray to these characters that make them more interesting and compelling. And I have to give him credit here. He does that with King Thranduil. And the fact that he's kind of dishonorable when he chops off the head of the orc whom he was questioning, but he kind of couples it with an indifference and a warrior-like contempt with his foes and enemies that's kind of appealing at the same time. It's an interesting give and take where he's kind of an anti-hero that you kind of connect to on a level, and even though you don't like what he's doing to some of these characters and messing with Tauriel and Legolas and their emotional journeys, you definitely respond to him caring about his people and trying to do what's best for his race and for his people in general, and trying to protect Elfkind and serve their interests. And I do think that King Thranduil is kind of an interesting anti-hero, where he's not very heroic in some respects, but the things that he does are effective and kind of important, and he sometimes helps the right people to do the right things, even if maybe he's doing it for selfish reasons. And it's pretty fascinating edge that Lee Pace is walking, and I look forward to seeing him continue this performance into the Battle of the Five Armies. So I remember how strange it was in the theatrical cut that Bilbo, who is the main point of view in an unexpected journey, frequently gets sidelined in different parts of the film, where you almost think, is Bilbo even there in that scene? And you have to look around very carefully to see if Martin Freeman's actually there. And occasionally you do see him keeping a low profile, while different dwarves and humans and other characters start really coming to the forefront, and Gandalf is on his own for most of the film, and with occasional team-ups with Radagast and then later Thrain. But, you know, it's kind of strange how much the dynamic shifts and changes, and how the point of view starts kind of getting fractured around a bit more, and we don't really have as tight of a point of view around Bilbo. And it does make this film sometimes get a little bit awkward from a completely cinematic point of view, where whenever point of view gets broken in a film, it can be fairly strange and off-putting. It can actually kind of pull the audience out, even if maybe if it's only subconscious, but consciously they're usually aware something has changed in this film, where I'm now analyzing the narrative, not from the point of view that I was being told we were analyzing it from. And so it gets a little bit strange to do that, and it doesn't sometimes perfectly work. So I will say that's one of the issues with Desolation of Smaug, is there's huge sections of it where Bilbo is kind of a passenger for the ride, and has very little to do with his point of view being important to certain scenes, which to many of the scenes. And it's not the worst thing in the world, because this film is an ensemble film. This entire trilogy is really an ensemble trilogy. So it doesn't break the bank. It doesn't completely shatter the illusion of this entire storyline, but it is a little bit of a noticeable thing that does kind of tug at those of us with kind of the hero's journey and the eye for, how the hero's journey progresses, how the story is going to progress, and how the point of view of the hero needs to be maintained throughout the film. And some of that is kind of broken a little bit throughout the Desolation of Smaug. And I understand it. I understand that we have really great characters that need a lot of time. And a lot of that time, Bilbo is just not there to either see it, he's not even in the scene at all, or when he is in the scene, he's just not an active participant, and spending too much time trying to see his point of view of those scenes, I think probably could slow down the pace of the film a bit. So I have a lot of sympathy for Peter Jackson. He had to weigh a lot of different things, and I think he probably made the right choice. But I will say, I am a little bit disappointed when sometimes in the middle of the Hobbit trilogy, the Hobbit story, we don't even know that Bilbo's around, or if he is around, it's almost like he's not. So that is one issue that, even though it does still happen in the extended cut, you do still feel that at times. There's so much more stuff with him and with the other characters that is so much fun and so interesting, and really helps deepen and make a much more profound narrative that I actually found in the extended cuts. It was actually a little bit less noticeable, this little narrative issue about Bilbo's point of view not being kept as often. Even though there are certain scenes where Bilbo is either completely absent or no longer a significant element in the story, the scenes where Bilbo does come front and center do seem to stand out as some of the best parts of the film. Particularly the scene with Bilbo rescuing the other dwarves as they travel through Mirkwood and they encounter the spiders in the Enchanted River. Also later on between Bilbo and Smaug. But, the real crown jewel of this movie, just like the crown jewel of An Unexpected Journey, was the Gollum scene, where Gollum and Bilbo fight each other with the Battle of Wits, the riddle battle, and start throwing riddles at each other. Again, there's a similar magic moment, which I think is the best scene of the film, which is Bilbo's interactions with Smaug the Terrible. I'm very impressed with Benedict Cumberbatch's performance as Smaug. For those who don't know, Benedict Cumberbatch, who plays Doctor Strange in Marvel's Doctor Strange movies, and Benedict Cumberbatch, who also played as Sherlock in the Sherlock film series with Martin Freeman. With Martin Freeman, actually, who's Bilbo in this film, playing his Dr. Watson in Sherlock. It was great to reunite those two actors and have them face off with each other. And even though Smaug is a huge giant dragon, they did motion capture on Benedict Cumberbatch's arms and all the way up through his face, and they overlaid as much as they could of Benedict Cumberbatch's facial performance and arms and hands, and translated it into Smaug, the CGI version of Smaug that we see in this film. And I can tell you, Smaug, he looks incredible in this 4K edition of the film. It's so good. Much better, in my opinion, than he did in the movie theater, which, again, is weird. I don't understand how movie theaters could do such a bad job with the projection of The Hobbit, but they really did. I think they kept the polarized 3D lenses, even on 2D screenings of the projectors, and it prevented the films from being at the proper lumen level. Anyway, we talked about this before, but the main point is I'm very impressed with this interaction between Martin Freeman and Benedict Cumberbatch as Bilbo and Smaug, and it is, in many respects, that scene that's the linchpin of the Desolation of Smaug. It's Bilbo trying to deceive Smaug into not doing all the horrible evil things that he's planning on doing, and trying to stop him. And it's kind of interesting how Smaug is so much more interested in causing distress to Bilbo than he is in trying to kill Bilbo. And killing Bilbo never seems to be his goal, but hurting Bilbo does, hurting Thorin, and that anger that Smaug has towards the dwarves, and his laughing at murdering them and killing them by scores. It's such a delightfully evil performance from Benedict Cumberbatch, and one that I can really tell he put his full heart into, which can be a little bit difficult at times, as Andy Serkis could probably attest when he played Gollum and all the other characters that he's so great at playing. And Benedict Cumberbatch reportedly tore up his tonsils pretty badly. I mean, his vocal cords. He actually tore up his vocal cords pretty badly trying to do the full performance of Smaug. And after his recording sessions were over, recording Smaug's dialogue, allegedly he was actually bleeding from his vocal cords. And so I'm not sure what they did or if they had any medical attention for him, but I thought he did a really great job, and he really put himself into that performance so well that you really have a harder time believing that is Benedict Cumberbatch doing that job. It's like so seamless. And I think the extra effects, of course, on his voice help give that power and depth and bass, and the timbre to Smaug's voice is an important thing that's been kind of manipulated through good sound editing and sound engineering. But the actual performance that comes through is very impressive, and it does elevate the Desolation of Smaug greatly. It makes it a much more interesting film, and having this dragon character so lifelike and so almost human-like in his emotional state of mind and his perceived intellectual and physical superiority to all other beings is something that's so arrogant and kind of amazing to watch being played out like this. I'm a huge fan of this scene. I think Bilbo's entire storyline, trying to get the Arkenstone for Thorin, is very well done, and there's interesting stuff with Thorin starting to not act like himself and starting to get obsessed with the gold that drove his own grandfather mad, and having the insanity of Thrain showcased so well in the scenes with Gandalf, side by side with these scenes of the dwarves trying to break into Erebor and take their home back. The relationship between Thorin is one of the more interesting elements of this film as well, where all of the goodwill developed in the first film really starts to have a lot of payoffs, conflicts starting to arise in this film now. And some of that goodwill between them is being tested by the tensions and the stress and anxiety that Thorin is feeling as he comes so close to fulfilling his quest, and he's afraid of falling short and not pulling through. Fear is making him more abrupt and short with Bilbo, causing tension in their developing relationship, and making Bilbo wonder if maybe Smaug isn't correct, that if Thorin does get a hold of the Arkenstone, that the greed and gold madness that had overtook his grandfather Thrawn, and the same type of madness that seemed to overtake his own father Thrain, also seems to be the thing that will take over Thorin now. And Bilbo is hesitant and seems to be wanting to avoid triggering that calamity on his friend Thorin. And Thorin is concerned that Bilbo is trying to stop him from claiming his birthright and accomplishing what he feels like is his destiny. And that is one of the interesting through lines of the entire story. And the fact that Balin, the dwarf, who has been kind of the heart and soul of the party in terms of carrying on and giving, imparting on knowledge to help give hope to the other dwarves, he begins to start to question Thorin and the rightness of their venture, and if it's worth getting Bilbo killed over, and the fact that he feels like Thorin isn't doing more to try to save Bilbo. And this entire drama is coming forward much more strongly right now, and I think works really well in this film. It's one of the strong points of the Desolation of Smaug. I was really on board with this entire storyline, so much more this time. in the theater, and I loved it. I loved every moment of it, practically every moment of it. And even those moments I didn't love as much, getting to those next moments I do love is so worth it. It was amazing. I'm hands down, this was a great accomplishment. I did have one major gripe and complaint though when I did watch this in the movie theater, and I still have the same comment to make now, but now it's kind of a moot point, and I'll explain why. In the movie theater, we knew we weren't going to get the last Hobbit film for another year. So the first Hobbit film was released in December 14th, 2012. The second Hobbit film, Desolation of Smaug, was released December 13th, 2013. And the final Hobbit film, The Battle of the Five Armies, was released December 17th, 2014. And so basically the same week of December every year from 2012, 2013, and 2014, a Hobbit movie was released. And we knew we were going to have to wait a year for that next Hobbit movie. And so when that moment happens at the very end of the film, and Smaug goes to go wreak havoc on Laketown, and the whole scene goes to black, I can tell you, in the audience, in the movie theater where we were at, there was a huge audible groan as people could tell the movie was over. Because I think a lot of us actually thought at first, oh, the projector broke and the screen is just black right now while all this amazing action scene is about to take place. And I was a little bit upset. I'm like, oh no, the projector isn't working in the movie. We're not seeing this great scene that's about to happen. I hope they can fix the projector in time. And then when Peter Jackson's name fades up, directed by Peter Jackson, there was an audible groan in the movie theater as everybody was like, you gotta be kidding me. That was like the worst place. Like, people could talk about cliffhangers. This wasn't a cliffhanger. This was taking people to the very edge and then leaving them in a place that's completely unresolved in such a way. It was devastating. It was devastating to the audience. They really couldn't take it. And I have to say, for that next year, I kept thinking back on the Desolation of Smaug, and I kept on thinking, I think they really should have included the Smaug attack on Laketown in that resolution, and then just showed us the Battle of the Five Armies as its own separate thing in the next movie. It's kind of a cheap shot where you don't show people the climax of the entire movie, which is Smaug attacking Laketown, and that entire battle that was supposed to take place between them, that was set up the entire film. And in fact, the film is called The Desolation of Smaug, and we thought, all right, we're going to get into the Desolation of Smaug. We're going to see what he does. And really, it's like, no, that entire Smaug storyline is really going to wrap up at the beginning of the next film, The Battle of the Five Armies. And that was a little bit of a cheap shot. It's like you're trying to force people who want to see the conclusion of this story to have to go to the next film in order to get that part, which I thought was a little bit of a... It was a pretty devastating thing to do to your audience. And I have to say, that was one thing that I was pretty upset by, and I still think was not a great idea. I think they probably maybe should have shifted some scenes around a little bit more to make it so that the Smaug stuff could have resolved at the end of this film. However, as I said, it's a moot point right now because now all the movies are available in the trilogy, and so whatever frustration or feeling that you have is momentary while you switch discs or while you click on HBO Max to click on the Battle of the Five Armies and let the next movie run, seconds later. So it's kind of a meaningless complaint at this point. It doesn't really matter because all the movies are now available and you don't have to wait a year to get a conclusion of the Smaug storyline. But when you did have to wait an entire year, it was devastating. That was a devastating wait, and I have to say, that's still the only major complaint that I think is still kind of valid now, even in this extended cut, is the separation of the Smaug conclusion and trying to put that at the beginning of the next film felt a little cheap, and it was a little cheap. It was a little cheap to do that, but I could kind of understand why he had to, and it was such a long scene, the entire stuff with Smaug. He wanted the Battle of the Five Armies to not be a super short film, and already as is, the Battle of the Five Armies is the shortest of the three films. So these were the theatrical running times of the three Hobbit films. An Unexpected Journey, 169 minutes. The Desolation of Smaug, 161 minutes, so 8 minutes shorter. And the theatrical cut of the Battle of the Five Armies ran 144 minutes, which was, about 20 minutes shorter than the first film, 25 minutes shorter than the first film. Progressively, the theatrical cuts were getting shorter and shorter, and it was a little bit frustrating. I could see how it was kind of important to Peter Jackson to actually have enough running time to kind of justify putting them into the three different movies, and rather than just have like a 90-minute conclusion or only a 2-hour conclusion film when the other films are about 3 hours each. From just the standpoint of dividing things up to be a little bit more equally than before, I understand the decision to put the Smaug conclusion at the beginning of the Battle of the Five Armies, but from a whole narrative and dramatic and storytelling point of view, I think it was the wrong decision. But it's, as I said, it's in the past. It's spilt milk. There's no use crying over spilt milk. It's something that happened, and it's not a big deal anymore. It's something that I think other filmmakers could probably learn from and try to avoid making that type of mistake when you're developing a film series, so that you don't end up necessarily just pulling the rug out from underneath your audience and leaving them with faces gaping open, not understanding how you cannot have a third act to your movie. And I remember I felt a little bit of the same way when I watched that Nicolas Cage film Next, which I think is a pretty solid film, except for the fact that I think it's missing its third act. It should have concluded the story. Instead, it just tells you, yeah, it's going to conclude. He's going to do it the right way later on. I'm like, oh my gosh, you actually ended the movie without completing the story. And it's like, that's one of the things that kind of irks me a little bit. That's one of the things that does kind of, it's a little burr in my saddle that really makes me sometimes take notice, because I think that's one of the few things about filmmaking you should kind of hold sacred, is the fact that there needs to be a completed hero's journey, or there needs to be a complete narrative storytelling. And when you really cut off a third act from a film, so that you only have Act 1 and Act 2, it leaves your audience feeling so tense and stifled. And especially in the event of not being able to get a conclusion for a year or more, it can be pretty heartrending. So even the extended cuts, the first one, Unexpected Journey, is 182 minutes. The Desolation of Smaug is 186 minutes. And the Battle of the Five Armies is 164 minutes. So even in the extended form, the Unexpected Journey goes from being the longest film to actually the Desolation of Smaug being the longest film. And An Unexpected Journey switches places with that as the second longest film. And it's really only 4 minutes shorter than A Desolation of Smaug, but still, that extra storyline really does help improve The Desolation of Smaug so much. And now that we have the full complete trilogy, we can just enjoy watching all the films back to back without any interruption if we want to. A lot of people like to watch a continuous marathon of The Hobbit with the Lord of the Rings movies, which, if I could have done that while making these videos and editing them simultaneously, I would have tried, but there's just no way. I needed to have a considerable amount of time in between screenings to make that work. So overall, the whole storyline works and flows much better, and we are connected to the characters like we've never have been before. And I feel like The Desolation of Smaug is very strong, and it works very well. And it's so much more interesting and engaging and funny. Like Bombur being such a badass with his different axes, as he has the barrel on as kind of an armor while he's fighting the orcs, which came across a little bit silly in the theatrical version as projected. It looked cooler, it looked more realistic right now, and it felt more like a really fun, interesting moment rather than some silly diversion. So really the whole thing, I'm really impressed by how much The Hobbit has been improving over this viewing, particularly with this transfer and with the video and audio setup that I do have with the 4K player. And I encountered some information on Smaug that Smaug's scales just rendering one of them would take the conventional processing power of one computer an entire week to finish rendering. And by rendering, that means the amount of time the computer takes to process the final image. And there's just so much detail, there's so much beauty to it, that it required vast server farms of interconnected processors to process all of the scales on Smaug. And it really comes through so beautifully now on home video. He looks remarkable, very amazing. You don't really get this quality of special effects almost anywhere else. It's a shame that these special effects did not come across as well in the theatrical presentation. At least mine. My theatrical presentation wasn't nearly as good. And so I have to say I'm pretty thrilled with what's happened to the storyline and the development and betterment. And, well, overall, I can't really say enough about how much I loved it. I think Desolation of Smaug does kind of take on the gravity of an Empire Strikes Back. It's actually in the same ballpark. It's starting to get there in the same ballpark, which I'm very surprised at. I'm really looking forward to watching the conclusion, which is what I'm about to do right now. So I'm going to end this review right now and just remind you that it's very helpful to subscribe to my channel, to like the video, and to comment down below. And when you do so, you'll actually enter into a contest to win a copy of Lord of the Rings, which I'm giving away in 4K. So this copy of the Lord of the Rings in 4K, it's the standard copy. So it's not quite as beautiful with all the bells and whistles as the Best Buy exclusive Steelbook edition, but it's incredible. And if I am not mistaken, it's going to look better on this display than maybe it ever has before, maybe even the movie theaters. Not sure. I'll let you know when we get there. But you have a chance to win this by just commenting down below in any of these videos about The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings. The reviews for the films themselves. So everything from An Unexpected Journey through to the end of Return of the King. If you comment in any of those videos, you basically give yourself another entry into the contest. However, what will improve your chances is to comment on each review of each of my films, because each one, you could basically have 6 entries overall if you end up commenting in each of them. As I said, I do have certain thresholds I'm going to establish for my video to have reached certain minimal viewing thresholds and stuff that's established in my contest rules. If you want the details, I'll put a link to the contest down below. But yeah, as long as you make a comment on any of my movie reviews for The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings movies, then you are entering into the contest. I'm looking forward to having the opportunity to announce the winner. So please share this. The faster it's shared, the faster I'm going to announce the winner. I'll announce the winner as soon as when each of my Hobbit and Lord of the Rings reviews has reached 10,000 views, 100 comments on each, and 1,000 likes for each video. I will announce the winner to the Lord of the Rings. So it's kind of up to you to some degree. If you can spread it around and share it with your friends, it'll help us to reach our contest level faster. And I plan on giving away many copies of the different movies that we're going to talk about. Some movies and TV shows are only on streaming services right now and aren't really available on 4K/Blu-ray. The ones that are, I'm going to try to do stuff like this as much as I can. Thank you for joining me on this unexpected journey in the Desolation of Smaug, and check out our next video on the Battle of the Five Armies. So far, I've been very impressed by the entire overall impact that these extended editions of The Hobbit in 4K have been having on me. And well, I'm glad to say, my precious, I'm becoming more and more fond of this little magical ring I found, and in fact, I think it's the thing to do now whenever I need to accomplish anything important, to stick it in. So long, and see you soon. To be a barrel rider is one of the ultimate compliments now I can give Peter Jackson. You are a barrel rider, my friend. You have earned the title. I bestow it upon you. Seriously though, this has been a great experience, and I'll see you next time with the Battle of the Five Armies. Until then,